Do you know the rules, and do you know when to break them? Hi, Larry K, ShadowAnyone.com, and the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series, premium private investigator training from someone who's been there and done that. Now, knowing the rules can keep you safe, can keep you out of all kinds of trouble, but sometimes there are times when you're going to want to break the rules. Now, I'm not talking about breaking the law or doing anything unethical. If you've followed me for a while, you clearly know that. But let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is not related to a case. I was just out living life. I was with my wife, and we were driving, and we saw a pretty horrendous drunk driving accident. Just absolutely terrible. The drunk, as much damage as he did to his car, still managed to take off and drive away. Very quickly, my wife and I were able to turn around and come find this guy, and he had brought his car back into an apartment complex and was attempting to leave on foot at this time. Now, I got out of the car, my wife blocked his vehicle in as best she could with her car, and I went to go get the guy on foot. And it was interesting because there was a small guy kind of going around the corner of this building the same time I was pursuing the drunk, and my wife saw this and thought I was going to go fetch this kind of smallish guy. Well, I get around the corner, I see the guy, I bring him back around, and he's actually significantly bigger than me. And first of all, if you've never had the experience where your wife, girlfriend, significant other thinks you're doing something relatively small and easy, and then comes to find out you're doing something a little bit bigger and more dangerous, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a good feeling, because it's kind of like she gets a glimpse of you that in a million years you wouldn't normally see in the person. But aside from that, and if you like that, you might like being a private investigator, because these types of things do come up. But aside from that, I bring the guy back around. Now, when I approach the guy, he actually still has the car keys in his hands. And normally when you make an apprehension, here's the rule. You want to get the keys. You want to prevent them from fleeing with the vehicle. Now, his vehicle probably still would have run some more. He probably could have slipped away. Maybe he would have rammed into other cars. There's all sorts of elements like that going on. But normally, the rule is, if you're apprehending someone, if nothing else, try to get their keys. At least, if they get away, you still have a car to deal with, track them down, that type of thing. And how far are they going to go on foot versus in a vehicle? That's the rule. I chose in this case to break the rule and allow him to hang on to those car keys. Now, why I did this was because eventually the cops are going to show up, and I want this guy to be found in possession of the keys of the car that was used in the crime. That ties him directly to the car. No matter what he says or how hard he tries to deny knowing the vehicle, being around it, or anything else, all the police have to do is say, well, what do those keys go to? I don't know. Well, as you can see, this would be a pretty strong piece of evidence to tie him to this accident. Even though we had myself and my wife as an eyewitness, a bunch of people saw it happen. That kind of thing doesn't necessarily end up being strong evidence, but having him in possession, tying him directly and with physical evidence to the car is very strong evidence. So there's a case where I chose very consciously to break the rule and allow him to keep the car keys. Now, if this seems like common sense to you, in a way it is. If you think this is something, well, I could figure this out when I could kind of figure out, that makes sense to me. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. It's just one of those things. But here's the thing. In these moments, you're dealing with the heat of the moment. You're dealing with a lot of adrenaline going. You're going after an event that involved, following somebody in a car, having them get out, having them flee on foot, going into a neighborhood, an apartment complex area you don't know. There's an awful lot going on. The fact that he was back there, does he have friends? Is he going into his apartment? There's a million things that'll be going through your mind in a situation like this. it's not really the time to be figuring out these little subtleties that are going to make your case stronger or really make or break your case. Imagine for a moment that we can't tie the guy to the car. Imagine for a moment that we can't get a conviction out of this. What have I just done? I've just stopped some guy walking through an apartment complex and basically, snatched him up for no apparent reason whatsoever. Technically, that makes me the bad guy unless we get the conviction. So knowing these rules is very, very important. And trying to figure them out in the heat of the moment is not what you want to do. Now, of course, you can learn these rules, all sorts of tips and tricks and things like this from the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series. We have the skip tracing, we have the process serving, we have the surveillance one. And if you don't have one in particular, you're thinking, I'm not really sure which one I should get to start out with, unless you have a real keen need to learn skip tracing skills or a real keen need to learn surveillance skills, I would suggest maybe starting out with the process server one, because that's a really good overview. I have a good section on there on skip tracing. I have a really good section there on pretext and using pretext. And this is the type of thing that makes it very easy to get into the private investigation world. Being a process server, getting into that is much easier than the rest. But this is where you can learn the tricks and tips and techniques and these types of rules so that when you hit the heat of the moment, you know what to do and you can handle the situation exactly as it should be. Remember, I've said it before, this is very key, and it's been shown time and time again in real-world events that have had after-action reports. You do not rise to the level of the threat. You default to the level of your training. I'm going to say that again. You do not rise to the level of the threat. You default to the level of your training. So if you think, well, when the time comes, I'll figure it out, I can handle it, that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, that's kind of dangerous. It can jam you up and physically get you hurt. It can get you into a world of hurt with the law, criminal, civil liability, all sorts of things. You know, get good training so you know how to handle these circumstances when they arise. This is Larry K, shadowanyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.